and thanks for tuning into my YouTube channel. Today I have Christian Bentley with me, and we're going to be talking about Black Catholics, the Catholic Church, and mental health. We wanted to talk about this today. We've actually been wanting to talk about this subject for a few weeks now. And after listening to Father Josh Johnson's latest podcast from March 25th, his Ask Father Josh podcast, we thought it would be a good time to really delve into this topic. On the podcast, Father Josh talked about mental illness, and he talked specifically about Saint Oscar Romero, who had suffered from obsessive compulsive disorder and scrupulosity. And then he also mentioned one of Saint Romero's close friends, Blessed, no, I'm sorry, Venerable Rutilio Grande, who was also from El Salvador, a priest who suffered with scrupulosity and who had a breakdown and was diagnosed with catatonic schizophrenia. And he was hospitalized twice for his illness. But he was still ordained a priest and continued to suffer and was eventually martyred. And we thought in light also of the Oprah Winfrey interview with Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, and just Meghan opening up about her own mental health issues and even her suicidal ideation at one point, we thought it would be a good idea to just talk about this because unfortunately, mental health isn't something that's talked about very openly in the Black community. And I'd also say in the Catholic community and the larger faith community. So we're going to talk a little bit about our own reactions um, to Father Josh's podcast, to Meghan Markle's interview, our own personal experiences with mental health challenges and how we've overcome them, and also the role that faith plays in our lives. So, Christian, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Alessandra. Very happy to be able to sit down and chat.
And if you wanted to start just kind of giving a little bit of an introduction about your own experiences, that would be really helpful.
Certainly. So I live with and manage a bipolar 1 disorder. I was diagnosed late in life. So I was around 30 years old when I was diagnosed with it, and had come off of doing an extreme low for a period of time that ended with a suicide attempt. Um, it was very eye-opening for me that I didn't have necessarily signs or moments throughout my teenage and young adult life that pointed to having a mental illness or chemical imbalance. And so being an African American male, there wasn't a lot of resources and tools around me to even get help before it got to the point of a suicide attempt. So it was very long. It took, a couple of years and some hospital stays before I was accurately diagnosed and then before a treatment plan could be implemented. In all of that, I had a lot of experiences, both religious and secularly, that helped me get to the point of where I can speak so openly and freely about it.
I know that that is one of the biggest things that I also faced in my own mental health journey because when I've written about this in 2010 I had a breakdown, and it wasn't until 2008, no, I'm sorry, 2018, when I was at a small, like, charismatic prayer group where someone had spoken a prophetic word over me and had basically said that everything that I was going through, like inside my heart and in my faith journey, that God really wanted me to bring that out to the world. And that's when I had decided to write on my blog for the first time publicly about my own mental health struggles. And then after the Meghan Markle interview, I wrote an op ed for Black Catholic Messenger, kind of talking about my own struggles. But I think it's really sad that for a good 8 years, I didn't feel comfortable talking about it publicly. And other than my family and the people closest to me who knew what had happened, that I didn't feel comfortable sharing because of the stigma and because of what I thought people would think about me, or anything like that. So I think that through my faith journey, it's been able to help me open up and to really take the position that if it was any other health condition, I wouldn't feel ashamed to talk about it. I wouldn't
Yes.
feel like I did something wrong. I wouldn't feel like that I shouldn't talk about it, or people might think differently about if I had diabetes, if I had cancer, if I had a broken arm, But when it comes to mental health, then there's so much stigma around that, and that's one reason we wanted to talk about this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the whole guilt and shame thing is very inappropriate and it's ill placed. And it comes from a period of time of a lack of scientific and medical understanding.
Mhm.
So there are terms like, oh, a crazy person, or that person's off their rocker. Different euphemisms like that don't really have a place in our society today.
Mhm.
And I also think that there's a huge thing that we've kind of diluted the water a little bit with when it comes to mental health and mental illness.
Mhm.
And those things are not the same.
Mhm.
Everyone has mental health. Anyone can have a mental illness, but the two are very different and have to be treated a little bit differently as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that um, I feel like this that society is making strides in some respect, where people are more openly talking about anxiety and depression. And
Yes.
well, where it's like, if you're feeling bad, then let's talk about it. If you're having anxiety, if you're having panic attacks, then it's fine. But I also think it's really important to talk about serious mental illness, and to talk about bipolar, to talk about schizophrenia, because that's also an experience that people have that's valid, and
Yeah.
there also should be acceptance around that, and people should also feel comfortable talking about their personal experiences with that. So I think and like you said, I think that it's difficult because now people just throw around words like bipolar, and it's like if someone is doing something that, whatever behavior, they just say that person's acting bipolar. And
Mhm.
it's like bipolar is actually like a diagnosed mental illness that has its own symptoms, that has its own, so it's like you can't just throw around the word like that. You can't just throw around the word schizophrenia. Schizophrenia does not mean that you have multiple personalities. Um,
Correct.
so it's like there's a lot of just misconceptions around mental health and around diagnoses.
Correct. And it's not an excuse for bad behavior either, which
Yeah.
sometimes people use that. They use these true diagnoses as terms to allow people to be able to write off their behavior. And that's not what mental illness is about.
So, did you want to talk a little bit more about like how when you were finally diagnosed, how you felt, and like how you came to accept that? Because I think that people can exhibit um, mental health issues. And oh, well, before we talk about that, I did want to also mention that Father Josh in his podcast had referenced Sirach 38. Sirach is a book in the Catholic Bible. If you're not Catholic, you don't have it in your Bible. But Sirach 31 says, um, 38 verse 1, make friends with the doctor, for he is essential to you. God has also established him in his profession. From God, the doctor has wisdom, and from the king, he receives sustenance. Knowledge makes the doctor distinguished and gives access to those in authority. God makes the earth yield healing herbs, which the prudent should not neglect. Was
Mhm.
not the water sweetened by a twig, so that all might learn his power? He endows people with knowledge to glory in his mighty works, through which the doctor eases pain and the druggist prepares his medicines. Thus, God's work continues without cease in its efficacy on the surface of the earth. My son, when you are ill, do not delay, but pray to God, for it is he who heals. Flee wickedness and purify your hands, cleanse your heart of every sin. Offer your sweet smelling oblation in memorial, a generous offering according to your means. Then give the doctor his place, lest he leave. You need him too. For there are times when recovery is in his hands. He too prays to God that his diagnosis may be correct and his treatment bring about a cure. And when I read that, I was like, praise God. Like, there's so many people who are having mental health problems, and a doctor has told them as such, or family members really encourage them to get help. And because of this stigma, or because of denial, people don't feel comfortable reaching out to a mental health professional. And also, let's be honest, that there's not a lot of help with like insurance or availability of doctors. So unfortunately, so many times it's not until someone's put on like a hold and forced into a hospital that they're actually able to get treatment. But I think it's really important that to try to seek help. And if someone tells you that they think that medication would be best for you, to really take that, pray about it, and really think about, do I even want a second opinion? But if you're continuing to be told that, then really, like any other health issue, listening. And so, Christian, if you want to talk a little bit about when you were diagnosed and listening to the doctor and accepting that.
Very fortunate that I had a really amazing doctor from the very beginning lay out what the expectations were for me. And one of the first things that he said was I would only have the limitations that I set on myself. So we went through all of the medications that were available, what side effects were, but also how important therapy and coping skills were, and setting these safe parameters in place so that I could manage my illness rather than allowing my illness to manage me.
Mhm. And I think that that's a really good point, because I know um, there's a lot of psychiatrists that only do medication management, and they'll literally see you for 15 to 20 seconds and that's it. And then just either prescribe you the medication, ask if you're having side effects, and that's the extent of your visit. But in my situation, I had a really good psychiatrist who's also like a homeopathic doctor, and she also does psychotherapy. So it was more like a therapy type of session, where then we talk about everything going on and then talk about like, okay, how are you doing, versus it being separate between like a therapist and a psychiatrist, which I think that model a lot of times doesn't work.
It's definitely outdated,
Mhm.
and it doesn't give someone a full therapeutic treatment plan because the idea would be that the psychiatrist, whoever's managing the medication, and your therapist or psychologist are communicating.
Mhm.
And very rarely that's not the case.
Yeah.
And different people, depending on what their stressors in life look like, what does their home environment look like, what does the demands on their job look like, determine the levels of medication that they need. And then if someone also deals with seasonal depression or anxiety on top of having a bipolar disorder, then that also calls for different medication and they can kind of forecast on what the seasons are going to look like or if a stressful triggering event happens. So there's definitely a lot that goes into it. But once you find the sweet spot, you can really manage it well along with medication.
Yeah. And I think that another thing I wanted to bring up when we're talking about mental health and the Catholic community, I know that when I first started, and I was also like you, I didn't have any problems with the like this type of mental health problem until I was 28, and after I had had my fourth child. I had my four kids in 6 years, and a year after, that's when I had my breakdown. And I remember after talking to a couple of priests, and one of them said, "Oh, you'll be fine. Don't worry. God will take care of you. You'll be fine." And it was like, okay, I don't feel fine. I feel terrible. My
Mhm.
whole life has just collapsed around me. You saying it's gonna be okay is not helpful.
Yeah.
And I had another priest who said, um, just go in front of the Blessed Sacrament and read the Psalms and you'll be okay. And it's like, this is where I think it's really important that priests understand that when it comes to a mental health problem, they need a mental health professional to help them. And that, yes, prayer is good. Yes, you need to, sit in front of the Blessed Sacrament, receive the Eucharist. If you need, receive the anointing of the sick. But you also need to talk to a professional specifically trained to help you with your mental health problems. So
Correct.
if I would have taken that advice and just said, oh, it's just going to get better, or if I would have just sat in front of the Blessed Sacrament, I wouldn't have been able to recover. I wouldn't have been able to get the help that I need.
Correct. Yeah, I think it's extremely important for people in authority to give proper advice.
Mhm.
Certainly think there was no malice behind the priest in giving that advice. I think they probably thought they were doing well, but that goes to show the disconnect with mental health being a health issue. If someone is experiencing symptoms of a heart attack or stroke, we immediately take those symptoms, take those early warning signs, is what we've labeled them, and seek help, right? Because we have introduced this thought that early intervention, early signs of stroke save lives. Early signs of a heart attack save lives because there's always little things that are being shown. It's the same thing with mental health issues. There are early signs that are shown. And if we were trained as a society to take advantage of looking at those signs, recognizing them, and then getting the appropriate treatment for it, then a lot of times the major crisis that happens or the breakdowns that happen because of mental health wouldn't happen. Anyone who's going through mental health issues, if they seek advice from a religious leader or a friend, should always be given spiritual counsel, but also understanding that having a mental illness is not a spiritual issue. The two do not, the two are not all conclusive. Now, certainly having a prayerful attitude, a spiritual mindset helped me go through treatment. It helped me be reasonable when speaking with the doctors. It helped me manage expectations about how quickly I was going to feel, what my limitations were. When I felt low and down because of the disappointment of a medication not working or overwhelmed by the anxieties of life, it was certainly nice to be able to fall back on Jesus. And that is where my spirituality came and helped me. But it was 100% not a replacement for the medical treatment that I needed to have in order to manage my illness.
And I know that you've said that going through your mental health struggles brought you closer to Jesus. And I know that in my particular experience, it was the opposite, where I really had a crisis of faith because I had thought, like, I was checking off all the boxes all my life. I've done, trying to do God's will and trying to be open and using natural family planning. And
Mhm.
then it felt like, okay, God, why would you let this happen? And for me personally, it was such a when it's like mental health and other people treat you like there's something wrong with you. They're not caring. A lot of times they're not compassionate. Like if people are in the hospital with getting chemo for cancer, people send flowers and they visit and everyone's encouraging. But when it's around mental health, then it's like people shun you. That was my experience, at least, that like my closest friends wouldn't talk to me, and family kind of was like saying like, oh, if you just made yourself, if you stop feeling bad for yourself, that you'd be able to get out of this. And it just the way that society treats people who deal with mental health issues makes it a lot harder to go through it. And I remember just having a crisis where it was almost like, okay, is there a God? Because the God I know wouldn't let me deal with this, and wouldn't have left me to be in the situation that I'm in. And it was working through that really strengthened my faith. Um, Ultimately overcoming the obstacles that I went through, being able to like restore my relationship with my husband and my relationship with my kids, and having been able to write about mental health in my two published novels. All of
Mhm.
that helped me realize that God didn't leave me for 1 second during what I went through. And that it's only through God's grace that I was able to go through what I went through and come out the other side. And I think that for people who feel like God has abandoned them, that it's really important to just know that He never abandons us. And that regardless of what society might say because of the struggles that you're going through, that you are precious to God, that He loves you more than anything, and that He's going to help you get to the other side.
Amen. Yeah. I think so. I was not a practicing Catholic when my health issues first arose. I was involved in another religious organization, and I went through a lot of hurt there. I can remember speaking to one of the religious leaders and asking for help. I was very, and this is there's so much history and backstory to this, but we finally get to the point where I actually have an audience and I'm asking for help as a man, asking for help was very hard. And being asked basically, like, well, I mean, if you tried to kill yourself, like, what are we supposed to do for you? Like, what do you want from us? And that for me was devastating. And it was also the straw that broke the camel's back and being in a very high control, um, unrealistic and on and I feel like an unchrist-like religious organization. Shortly after that, I had an uncle who passed away in my family, or of a very long history of being Black Catholics in the United States. And it took me back to my childhood church. And it was during that funeral mass, and I had been searching for something, and I didn't know what it was. That it was an instantaneous thing. I couldn't take communion, of course, at the funeral mass because I wasn't a practicing Catholic at the time. But I remember instantly feeling this longing for the Eucharist and instantly feeling like this is where God wants me. I made an appointment to meet with the priest the week after that and began my journey in returning back to my Catholic faith. In this journey, a lot of people said a lot of hurtful, mean things. A lot of people were very not understanding. And a lot of people were very hateful, even in my returning back to my natural foundation religion of being Catholic. People were very not supportive of that, which was mind blowing to me. But in all of that, I truly felt God's grace from the congregation, from the different ministries within the church, from my priest, from my deacon, and the support of trying to figure all this out, or even just being able to just sit in the presence of God, which we are so unique with in our Catholic faith, in our community, that we have the ability to do that. And so in while trying to manage my illness, one of the healthy distractions that I used was really delving into and learning more about my faith. And that helped me. It was a coping skill, but it also gave me some very long term coping skills and mechanisms to use when medication is not a be all solve all. You know, you're still going to have side effects even if you take your medication regularly. But having my faith to lean upon, having the true belief in the intercession of the saints. And even when I was a kid and I was growing up Catholic, I didn't quite understand what the intercession of the saints was about. I didn't really understand that these faithful men and women were pleading and petitioning God on my behalf. Rather, I asked them to or not, but asking them to obviously was extremely intentional, and I could have exactly what I wanted presented to God, presented. Um, all of that was a game changer because I rekindled my faith while learning about and trying to figure out how to manage my illness.
That's so great. I think that's such a great testament just how you really felt the presence of God, and that your faith community, the Catholic faith community, was able to help you get through that. And I think that that's one of the reasons we're talking about this, because that's the ideal, that faith communities really embrace people who are having mental health struggles, that we're able to talk to family and friends about if it seems like they're exhibiting symptoms, and being able to get that help before it becomes a crisis. And one of my favorite things I've heard about saints and their intercession is that we always think like, oh, we found this saint and we start learning about them, but that actually the saints choose us, and that they introduce themselves to us and they help us in our lives. And I've definitely found that, like, there will be times when I'm introduced to a saint and I'm just like, this saint is amazing, this saint is saying everything that I need to hear right now.
Imagine how that worked.
So one other thing that we wanted to talk about was the criminalization of mental illness. And I know this is kind of something that's above my head and I haven't done enough research, but there was a period where there was the deinstitutionalization of mental illness. So a lot of mental hospitals were closing. And in place of those mental hospitals, there's now a huge increase of people who are mentally ill being incarcerated. And I have from a 2019 article in Prison Legal News, it says, according to federal data, 40% of prisoners were diagnosed with a mental health disorder between 2011 and 2014. And NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, said that every year, 2 million people with psychological problems are jailed. So, unfortunately, a lot, like we were saying before, that if someone has like a heart attack and or a heart condition, we rush them to the hospital, they get help, they whatever needs to be done, whatever procedure needs to be done, that we try to get help for them. And unfortunately, with mental illness, let's say that someone's experiencing like mania, or someone's experiencing psychosis, or whatever the different symptom could, or the mental health issue could be. A lot of times, instead of getting mental health treatment for a mental health problem, their behavior is considered dangerous and they're put in prison for that. And many people who are in prison or in jail often get harsher treatment from prison guards, are more likely to be in solitary confinement, more likely to be hurt by or abused or assaulted by other prisoners. So I think that that's really tragic. And it's something that we really need to think about, because when I was driving today, I saw someone on the side of the road who was like talking to themselves and kind of like obviously probably having mental health issues. And it's like, how common is that when we see someone who's homeless, who's clearly exhibiting mental health problems, and it's completely normal in our society for them to be homeless. And
Mhm.
it's like, how did we get to that place where we just, that's normal to us, where people aren't getting the type of help they need, they're not able to be housed, and that's just commonplace.
Yeah. You take someone who has a mental health issue and you compound it by adding these super high stressors
Mhm.
on top of it. And they're in situations that they can't help themselves out of because they don't have the cognizance. And going back to the criminality of mental illness, we have a project going on in Virginia right now to decriminalize mental illness, to recognize mental illness. The symptoms produced are behavioral.
Mhm.
So I think that's the very first thing to classify, is that if you have a mental illness, the side effect, the symptom is maybe that you don't black out, maybe you don't get the shakes or you don't feel chest pain, but you have some type of behavioral reaction. And depending on how where that person is on the spectrum from mania to depression, or where they're on the spectrum for their own illness, depending on if they have a schizophrenic reaction or multiple personalities or whatever their illness is, the behavior is directly impacted by that chemical imbalance. And so, literally, we have a criminal justice system that punishes and imprisons people for having a medical condition that they 100% cannot control. And so the effort right now is to put language into the prosecuting measures that allows mental health, illness, and behavior to be presented as evidence. Right now, it cannot be presented as evidence. And so a lot of individuals, it's safe to say, just based on the numbers, are in prison, not because they're criminals, but because they had an untreated mental health crisis that resulted in a behavioral uh, symptom. And now look where they're at. And then this is how we get into this generational thing and these huge repeat offenders. A lot of it has to do with how mentally healthy are they.
Mhm.
And so for me personally, I've been through a lot with my mental health. I am, by the grace of God, in the position that I'm in, and I am so vocal about it because I feel so blessed to be able to articulate about what it's like to have the mental illness, about what it's like to go to the criminal justice system with a mental illness, about what it's like to have a behavioral reaction to your illness and to have the courts try to criminalize it. I realize how fortunate I am that that did not happen, and that because of the circumstances I've been afforded in life, I was able to fight and defend myself through those procedures. I also recognize how many of my brothers and sisters are not able to do that. And so, even though it's very hard to be open about it, it's a taboo conversation, not only in America, but in our African American, our Black community, amongst men and amongst Catholics. It's not something you can pray away. I feel I have to be vocal about it. I have to share my experience because people have to be aware of what's going on. And you and I both are in interesting positions where we have the beauty of being able to articulate things in a manner in which other people can listen, in a manner in which they can actually hear what needs to be said. And therefore, I think having conversations about mental illness, about how Catholics and African American individuals and community as a whole can be more encompassing and embracing of helping people get treatment, of helping people have healthy, balanced lives, then that's a mission from God.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I wanted to read this quote from the book Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. And it kind of perfectly encompasses what you just mentioned. Um, Brian Stevenson said, I frequently had difficult conversations with clients who were struggling and despairing over their situations, over things they'd done or had been done to them and led them to painful moments. Whenever things got really bad and they were questioning the value of their lives, I remind them that each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. I told them if someone tells a lie, that person is not just a liar. If you take something that doesn't belong to you, you are not just a thief. Even if you kill someone, you're not just a killer. I am more than broken. In fact, there is a strength, a power even in understanding brokenness, because
Mm,
embracing our brokenness creates a need and desire for mercy, and perhaps a corresponding need to show mercy. When you experience mercy, you learn things that are hard to learn otherwise. You see things you can't otherwise see. You hear things you can't otherwise hear. You begin to recognize the humanity that resides in each of us. And I think that that's exactly what you were talking about, that because of our experiences that we've gone through, and because of the mercy that God showed to us, that we in turn want to extend that mercy to others, that we in turn want other people to feel that they can also get the help they need to overcome whatever problems that they're going through. And I think it's also interesting because Brian is particularly speaking about people who are incarcerated and the stigma that comes along with incarceration and being considered a criminal. But I think that when it comes to mental health, also, it's like you're not bipolar. You're not depressed. You're not schizophrenia. It's a health condition that you have. And it's like the person who's experiencing that are first and foremost a person, first and foremost a child of God, first and foremost beloved. That's their identity. And it's like when you can separate yourself from your illness and see who you are first, then that's a good first step to really getting the help that you need. Because it's like, so often people will just say like, oh, that person's bipolar. It's like,
Mhm.
you wouldn't walk around and say, oh, that person's heart attack, oh, that
Yeah,
person's cancer. And it's
exactly.
like, that's the type of change we need in the community, in our Catholic community, in the Black community, where we're able to see people outside of the mental health issues they're having.
And that's a very good point you bring up. That is where our Catholic faith community, that's where they could really be a true ally,
Mhm.
is helping individuals, helping people remember that they are a child of God. If someone comes to you, whether you are a minister, whether you lead a ministry within the church, or you're a deacon, or you're a priest, and they confide in you and they ask for help and advice, that is where you can reaffirm who they are. You can reaffirm that they are a brother or sister. You can reaffirm that they are loved by Jesus, that they are important, that they are precious. And then you can reaffirm that based on the Bible, based on the scriptural principles that we have, it's appropriate to get medical attention and medical treatment. And that is how the two can help one another. They can coexist. It's so important. I feel I'm to the point now where I've had years of therapy, years of medication management and coping skills, and I am in a beautiful spot of being able to manage my illness. And there are days where I'm like, oh, whoa, today's not the day, and I have to tap out and I have to pull back a little bit. But for the most part, on a daily basis, most people wouldn't even know that I manage a mental illness.
I'm so sorry, Christian. My internet is terrible today, so I'm interrupting you. But I think we're gonna wrap up our talk, and I'm so glad that you were able to spend a little bit of time talking about this really important issue. And I just wanted to ask if you had anything that you'd like to say, just kind of as a concluding comment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a good concluding comment is that you can be a spiritual, deeply devoted Catholic person and still have a mental health issue or a mental illness. You can still have a mental illness and still be a devoutly Catholic individual. So if rather it's ourselves, if someone's listening to this and they are themselves going through some type of crisis, or knowing that perhaps their depression or their anxiety or any other symptoms that they're feeling are becoming a bit much, or if we're in a trusted position where someone comes to us and shares this information with us, always confirm that they are important and that God loves them. That is the first thing that everyone should immediately do. Also, listen to them. Actually, actively listen to what they are saying. And if you feel comfortable, encourage them to seek out medical professional help. Maybe they don't need medication. Maybe they just need therapy. Maybe they just need to be taught appropriate coping skills to use when they're feeling stressed or they're feeling anxious. Maybe they might need medication or a longer term treatment plan. Whatever that is, it needs to be handled and taken up by a medical professional. So we have a responsibility. It's how we love our neighbors. It's how we love people. It's how we show love amongst ourselves, is to be there for individuals with they're hungry or they're thirsty, they're naked or they're homeless or they're ill or they're sad. We should be there for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also just wanted to say to conclude that we were talking a lot about people who are experiencing the mental health issues, because a lot of times people who themselves have experienced it don't have a voice. And a lot of times it's like a therapist or a psychiatrist or a social worker who's talking about people who are having the issue. So we felt like this was an important conversation to have. But one of the people we didn't talk a lot about is people who are caretakers or married to
Yeah.
someone, or if it's your parent or if it's your child. And we're definitely not downplaying how hard it can be in a relationship with someone who's experiencing these health issues, because a lot of times people don't get the help they need, or they don't think they need help. And a lot of times people feel they feel helpless, they feel overwhelmed, they feel like they can't deal with it anymore. So I also want to encourage people that there are support groups for people who have a loved one who has a mental illness. There's places like NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, that has different classes and different workshops for people to understand more about how they can help their loved ones. So, just wanted to really say, all around, if you are at all affected by mental health issues, just to really seek that help, to not only pray, but also to get outside support that could be helpful for you and your loved ones.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, it's been great talking to you today. I hope that you continue to stay well, and I look forward to us having another conversation.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. I appreciate the invitation.
Okay, thank you. Bye.